The words had barely settled when the room stiffened like a held breath. The professor had just finished declaring the problem untouchable, steeled away by time and pride when a single hand rose from the back row. It was small. It was calm. And it belonged to the one person no one expected to challenge the future that had just been announced. She was the only black girl in the room, sitting beneath a cracked ceiling tile that hummed with old lights. Her palm was open, fingers steady, as if asking permission not to speak, but to be seen. The chalkboard still carried the ghost of equations, white dust clinging like frost. Around her, chairs creaked as students shifted, some with curiosity, most with doubt. A few smirked. A few stared at their notebooks, hoping not to be noticed. She did not look angry. She did not look afraid. She looked focused, the way someone looks when they have already walked a long road in their mind and reached the end. Her name was Aaliyah Carter. She was 19. She wore a worn hoodie and sneakers that had seen too many miles. Her hair was pulled back, neat and simple. There were faint circles under her eyes, the kind that come from late nights and early mornings. It's not from parties, but from work and worry. She had learned to keep her face still, to let silence do the talking. In rooms like this, silence was safer. The professor paused, annoyed more than curious. He had spent his life in halls like this, where ideas were weighed by who spoke them, not always by what they were worth. He had just told the class that the problem on the board had stood undefeated for generations, that experts had tried and failed, that the best minds had agreed it would take 200 years to crack, if it ever did. And now this girl, barely out of high school, thought she had something to add. The room waited, not in support, but in expectation of a lesson. A lesson about limits, about knowing one's place. Aaliyah stood when she was acknowledged, her chair sliding back softly. She did not rush. She did not apologize. She walked toward the board with the quiet confidence of someone who had practiced this moment in private, long before it arrived in public. As she moved, memories moved with her. She remembered the kitchen table in her grandmother's apartment, its surface scarred with years of use. The smell of coffee in the morning burnt just a little. The sound of rain tapping the window as her grandmother hummed low songs from another time. That table was where numbers first became her friends, where puzzles were not games, but shelter. Her grandmother had worked nights, cleaning offices where the lights never slept. She would come home tired, hands rough, smiled gentle. She believed in Aaliyah with a faith that felt like gravity. When Aaliyah asked why numbers mattered, her grandmother said, because numbers never lie, Dan. They never leave you if you learn their language. When her grandmother passed, the apartment felt too quiet. The hum was gone. The table felt empty. Math became a way to speak to someone who could no longer answer. Each solved problem felt like a letter sent. Each pattern understood felt like a reply. School had not always been kind. Teachers praised her work but questioned her presence. Classmates copied her homework and laughed when she raised her hand. She learned early that excellence could make people uncomfortable. She learned to be careful with her gifts. But the problem on the board was different. It had followed her home, sat with her on the bus, waited beside her bed. She had turned it over and over, not trying to beat it, but trying to understand why it resisted. One night, while the city slept and sirens sang far away, she saw it. Not a full answer, not a victory parade of symbols, but a doorway. A way in. Back in the classroom, she picked up the chalk. It felt cool, dry. Her fingers were steady. She did not challenge the professor. She did not say the problem was easy. She simply began to write. At first, the room did not change. Pen scratched. A cough echoed. Someone whispered. The professor crossed his arms. But then the writing shifted. Lines curved where they were not expected to. A pattern emerged, simple and strange, like a path through tall grass. The professor leaned forward almost without realizing it. Aaliyah explained without flair. She spoke of symmetry, of balance, of looking not at what the problem demanded but at what it allowed. Her voice was calm, clear, unhurried. She did not fill the space with ego. She filled it with sense. Silence grew, not from disbelief, but from attention. This was not a complete solution. She never claimed it was, but it was something more dangerous to pride. It was progress. The professor's face changed, color draining, then returning. He asked questions, sharp ones, meant to poke holes. Aaliyah answered without defense. When she did not know, she said so. When she did, she showed why. The class watched a quiet battle unfold, not of voices raised, but of ideas tested. The old guard against the new. Certainty against curiosity. One student in the front row stopped smirking. Another closed his laptop. A girl near the window leaned forward, eyes wide. The room, once heavy with doubt, now hummed with something else. Respect. The professor stepped back. He looked at the board as if seeing it for the first time. Years of certainty cracked, not shattered, but bent. He said that this reframed the problem, that it shortened the distance, that it asked new questions. Aaliyah nodded. She did not smile. She erased nothing. She returned the chalk and walked back to her seat. For a moment, no one moved. Then the room erupted. Not in noise, but in motion. Students stood, some clapping softly, some simply standing, as if rising was the only response their bodies could find. The professor cleared his throat, words failing him for once. Aaliyah sat, hands folded, heart pounding. She felt the weight of eyes on her, not heavy now, but warm. Later that week, the department called a meeting. Papers were reviewed. Emails were sent. Aaliyah's work traveled further than she ever had. Mathematicians wrote back with excitement, with questions, with praise. The narrative shifted. The problem was no longer sleeping. It was waking up. At a public lecture, the professor stood beside her. He spoke of humility, of learning from unexpected places. He said that brilliance does not ask permission. It arrives when it is ready. Aaliyah listened, quiet as always. When it was her turn, she spoke one sentence that echoed through the hall. Silence can be a form of courage. Another moment, another room. She said something that found its way onto screens and walls. The future listens when you speak with truth. And when a student asked how she knew where to look, she answered with words that felt like a gift. I learned to trust patterns when people did not trust me. The applause that followed was long, not loud, but deep. In the days that came, Aaliyah received offers, mentors, doors opening where walls had been. She chose carefully. She moved slowly. She remembered the kitchen table, the hum, the promise. The problem on the board would take years to fully solve. She knew that, but it would not take 200. The path had been lit. On a quiet evening, she returned to her grandmother's apartment, now empty but still warm with memory. She sat at the table and smiled for the first time in days. The numbers waited, patient as ever. The world would tell this story many ways. Some would focus on the shock, some on the shame, some on the miracle. But the truth was simpler. A girl raised her hand. A room listened. The future shifted. And sometimes, that is all it takes. If this story moved you, share where you are watching from. Tell us what silence has taught you. And subscribe for more stories that honor the strength we too often overlook.